Marcus Aurelius had generals who hated him. They watched his every move, catalogued his weaknesses, waited for him to crack. And because of that, he never did. While his friends told him he was great, his enemies told him the truth. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit: the people who want to see you fail might be the most valuable mirrors you'll ever have. Your enemies are paying attention in ways your friends never will. When Nietzsche published his early work, his critics dissected every flaw with surgical precision. His friends celebrated him. His enemies? They found the contradictions, the gaps, the overreach. Nietzsche later admitted that hostile reception forced him to sharpen ideas he would have left blunt. Now think about your own life. When was the last time a friend told you your business idea was half-baked, your argument was weak, or your plan had a fatal hole? They didn't. They wanted to keep the peace. But your rival at work? He noticed. He'll use it. That gap between what your friends see and what your enemies see is where your blind spots live. Friends have social incentives to protect your ego. Enemies have strategic incentives to exploit your weaknesses. That means enemies do the cognitive work of finding what's actually wrong with you, which makes their perception, however malicious, often more accurate. This is what psychologists call motivated perception. People searching for your flaws will find real ones, not just invented ones. The criticism that angers you most is usually the criticism closest to the truth. Tolstoy was called vain, self-righteous, a hypocrite who preached poverty while living on an estate. It enraged him. He fought it publicly, dismissed the critics, wrote letters defending himself. But read his diaries, private, unguarded, and you see him wrestling with exactly those charges. The accusations that provoked the strongest reaction were the ones that landed. Jung called this the shadow, the parts of yourself you've disowned, projected outward. When an enemy names one of those parts, the shame response is almost chemical. Your nervous system doesn't react that way to lies. Emotional charge is a signal, not noise. When criticism produces defensiveness out of proportion to the accusation, that's your psyche recognizing something it doesn't want recognized. Stoic practice here is simple but hard. Before you reject hostile feedback, ask yourself one question: what if 10% of this is true? You don't have to accept the whole attack. Just find the grain of accuracy and work with it. Enemies reveal your actual reputation, not the one you think you have. Machiavelli wrote that a prince should worry less about what he intends and more about how he is perceived by those who have reason to watch him critically. Your friends see your intentions. Your enemies see your actions and their effects. A man might think of himself as direct and no nonsense. His friends agree, they admire it. But 3 people who've worked under him would call him cold, dismissive, someone who never listens. Both things can be simultaneously true. The friends see the trait you're proud of. The enemies experience what that trait costs others. If you only ever talk to people who like you, you are navigating with half a map. Reputation is not what you project, it's the residue you leave in other people. The people with least incentive to protect your feelings give you the most accurate readout of that residue. This is why smart executives pay for 360-degree feedback processes that specifically solicit criticism from people who don't like them. You can do the same thing for free, just by taking hostile feedback seriously instead of dismissing the source. Having enemies means you stood for something. Epictetus was a slave. He had enemies by birth and by class, people who owned him legally, people who profited from his subjugation. And yet his discourses survived 2,000 years later because the clarity of his thinking was forged under that kind of pressure. Compare that to someone who has lived without friction, without opposition, without anyone pushing back hard. That person is often soft in the center, untested, unrefined. Not because they're weak by nature, but because they were never forced to find out what they were made of. The fed-up empath who gets walked on for years and finally draws a line, he now knows something about himself he couldn't have known any other way. His enemies taught him where his limits were. Adversity is a crucible. It's not romantic or abstract, it's functional. Stress testing a system reveals which parts hold and which fail. The same is true of character. You don't discover your values in comfortable rooms. You discover them when someone is actively trying to undermine them. This is why Seneca wrote that he was grateful for hard times, not because suffering is good, but because it was the only condition under which he could verify what he actually believed. You can use your enemies deliberately as a compass and a calibration tool. Think of any man who's built something real, a business, a reputation, a body of work. Ask him who gave him more useful information over the years, his supporters or his critics. Almost always, it's the critics. Not because critics are right and supporters are wrong, but because critics force you to answer questions you'd rather ignore. There's a practical exercise here. Make a list of people who actively dislike you or who have criticized you harshly. For each one, write down the specific charge they made. Then, without defending yourself, ask whether there's any world in which that charge is accurate. You're not looking for reasons to hate yourself. You're looking for data. This is what Viktor Frankl called turning suffering into achievement, not accepting that the pain is justified, but extracting meaning and utility from it regardless of its source. Your enemy doesn't have to be right about everything to be useful. Even a broken clock gives you accurate information twice a day. The discipline is separating the malice from the message, and working with the message. 3 things to take from this. First, the people who want to see you fail are watching you more carefully than the people who love you, which means they're often seeing you more clearly. Second, the criticism that triggers the strongest defensive reaction is almost always pointing at something real. That emotional charge is a signal worth following. Third, enemies are not a sign that you've done something wrong. They're often a sign that you've done something that mattered enough to create opposition. The question isn't how to avoid people who dislike you. The question is whether you have the discipline to learn from them. If this hit different, if it made you think about someone in your life who's been trying to tell you something you didn't want to hear, subscribe. We drop one of these every Tuesday and Friday. No fluff, no motivation poster nonsense. Just the ideas that actually hold up when things get hard.